So this program, held monthly for glass students across the world, is meant to connect, share ideas, and build a community. It's hosted by the GAS student representative. And with that, I'll hand the mic over to Paige, who will introduce our special guest and our topic for today. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Jenna. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Paige. I'm the student representative for the board of directors for the Glass Art Society. And it's my pleasure to introduce Madeline, who is an American artist working in glass. Maddie received her MFA in glass at Rochester Institute of Technology and a BFA in glass from Tyler School of Art. She draws upon her musical background to create glass musical instruments, which explore physical connection between players. She utilizes hot glass as a performative medium to consider notions of intimacy and compromise. Madeline's sculptural glasswork has been exhibited in venues throughout the US and featured in New Glass Review 35 and 41. She has instructed glassworking in schools and institutions throughout the East Coast, including UrbanGlass, Salem Community College, and Rochester Institute of Technology. And without further ado, I'll turn it over to Maddie, who will be giving us our first student meetup demonstration. Thanks, Maddie.
Hey, everyone. Thanks, Paige. Thanks, Jenna, for having me. I'm really excited to be here and demoing for you today. This is my first live stream demo ever, so I'm pretty excited. It's a kind of a cool new thing. And it's great to see everyone here, so thanks for coming. So today I'm going to talk about sound, music, and performance in glass. And I'm also going to talk about the way I use glass to create musical instruments and approach the flame shop in a sort of a performance art venue. So I'm going to start by just showing my work for a few minutes. And if you have any questions, feel free to unmute yourself and shout them out or type them in the box, and I'd be happy to answer them. I really love to just approach this as a casual kind of thing, so feel free to do that. So I'm going to share my screen. All right, so I use glass instruments to explore connection between people. I'm really interested in states of intimacy and almost like potential awkward situations and connection and interaction between participants. So I have a musical background, specifically in classical chamber music. I grew up playing violin and viola, and that was sort of the thing that really informed my work a lot. So ever since the beginning, I was always really interested in finding a way of how can I incorporate my interests in glass and music together. I'm frozen. Okay, sorry guys, froze out for a second. Computer's a little old. So these are my sort of earlier glass musical instruments, and yeah, I was never really concerned with replicating a musical instrument like perfectly out of glass, because that doesn't really seem important to me. What I'm really interested in is what are ways that I can embrace experimentation and absurdity with these instruments. They're very experimental. And I think there's just something inherently funny about woodwinds and brass instruments. When you play a trumpet, for instance, there's not really an easy way to play it gracefully, especially for me. You're blowing into this thing, creating a very loud noise, it's pressed up against your mouth. And especially when it's made out of glass, I like to say there's nowhere to hide with the glass trumpet. There's no spit valve, and you can really, like, your spit collects inside the condensation of your breath. And there's this real relevant trace of the fact that you've been blowing into this instrument. And I'm really interested in that. So I like to embrace the sort of inherent goofiness of musical instruments. So I did collaborations with musicians, and I explore with all different kinds of ways that I can make noise in glass, such as percussion, bells, different kinds of woodwinds and brass. The instrument in the right-hand photo that is hanging on that test tube holder, that is the most delicate instrument I've ever made. And it's a xylophone. It's just a single line. It's kind of like a glass spring, and it's so delicate that it will break eventually when you play it. And I'm very interested in creating an instrument that is just so ephemeral and delicate that it eventually breaks, and it has like a sort of a predetermined lifespan. Every time I switch my slides, my computer gets very slow. Okay, thanks for bearing with me. This is a glass trumpet I made, and this is one of the earlier ones. It's just 10 feet of borosilicate tubing that I curled up into a spiral shape. I'm gonna play it, I'm gonna risk playing it really quick. So the longer the tube that you use for a trumpet, the more overtones you can create and the more sort of depth of sound you can create. So I really like the challenge of coiling as much glass as I possibly can into one instrument so I can create the most tones. And these are styled like a natural trumpet from the Baroque era, which are the earliest kinds of trumpets. They didn't have valves. So you had to create all of the different notes just with your embouchure, and it was very difficult, but you can create a whole range of notes. All right. So, so I went to Tyler School of Art for undergrad, and I graduated in 2014. And I was out of school for 4 years, and I had a studio, I made work and worked as an artist assistant. And it was pretty good, but I kind of eventually hit a wall with the work I made and the ideas I had. I felt a huge disconnect between what I was thinking and what I was making. So I decided to go to grad school, and in 2018, I applied to grad school, and I went to Rochester Institute of Technology. I'm broadcasting from their flame shop right now. It's an awesome flame shop. And I got a scholarship. So it's been an amazing experience. So during my time at RIT, I've been able to experiment and think about new ways of making glass and working with it, and explore interests that are really relevant to me that I've always wanted to explore but never really had the chance. So grad school was a great chance to work on making impractical work I didn't have to worry about selling, and work I would never have been able to make otherwise if I was just alone in my studio, because I had that dialogue with other people and being in a really creative environment that pushes you to think in every direction. So I love this program. I highly recommend it. If anyone has any questions or is considering grad school, feel free to talk to me about it. These are some pictures from a series of work I do with spun glass. This is soft glass from the hot shop. And I make instruments, not only musical instruments, but instruments for the body, because I'm really interested in ways of like figuring out varying degrees of ability for the human body and varying degrees of compromise. So sometimes the instruments are optical, such as this. This is a series called the Altered Reality Goggles, and it uses a series of mirrors to place the wearer's vision right in the middle of their forehead. And I'm just interested in this, it creates a kind of a slightly uncanny out of body experience where your vision is slightly moved over to the left. So everything is slightly askew. And I'm just fascinated with ideas of putting the viewer in slightly different elements of physical state with their body. Something that really informs my work is the fact that I have a chronic condition that makes it very painful to walk and stand. So everyday actions like that are quite difficult for me. And I've had this for a long time, over 10 years, and it's caused periods of isolation in my life. And in the experiencing isolation, I've really wanted to explore connection. So having a lot of isolation made me want to reach out and connect with people even further. So that's something that really informs every aspect of what I do. And it also feeds into the idea of bodily ability and compromise. So moving ahead, in grad school, I got the chance to explore musical instruments in a more philosophical, conceptual way. Before I was just playing them for the sake of something that was really delightful for me. But here I get to tie it into more conceptual experiences. So this I call instrument for connection and compromise. And it's a multi-person instrument for 4 people. And it's brought on by this idea of voluntarily disabling yourself in order to grow closer to other people. By adding multiple mouthpieces onto this trumpet, I make it so I cannot play the trumpet alone. I need at least 3 other people there to just cap it with their mouth so I can create a tone. And it puts the players, whoever participates, in a very intimate situation where we're very close, we're making awkward eye contact, and it can be nice for some people. It can also be potentially very uncomfortable. So I'm very interested in like finding the line between how close is too close, and it seems to be very different for every person. With a piece like this for multiple people, there's also this aspect of collaboration, like in classical chamber music, we're all collaborating together to create a sound, but also we're fighting each other. Because if someone's blowing into the trumpet and you're not, their breath is going to go in your mouth. And that's really unpleasant. So there's aspects of both working together and against each other. And I like to laugh. I like creating situations that I think are just absurd, but also can talk about slightly more complex ideas on a deeper level. This is a trumpet for 2 people, and it's called Dual Duets. So again, it's a really intimate trumpet that wraps around your neck. And when we play it together, I think of it as a battle of the breaths. I'll play one note and my partner will hit my note off so he can create his note, because they both can't really exist in full force simultaneously in the trumpet. So it's like a duet, but also a battle. And here's a quick video if I can play it. So that's really fun. These are obviously pre-COVID works. I made these right before COVID really hit the US, and I can't wait to be able to make them again. So, in the chat. Okay, cool. So I like to approach the flame shop as a place of communal experience. Often when we think of flame working, we might think of an isolated, solitary person alone in the flame working studio working on a piece by themselves. And that's been my experience, at least most of my life. I've always had a private studio and I just chug away and never go outside and just work at my torch solo all the time. So I'm really interested in thinking about ways that flame working and the flame shop can be a venue for a group experience, performance, as well as ephemerality. So focusing on making something that is more about action than end result. This is a still from a workshop I did that was kind of part religious experience, part fancy dinner party, and part flame working class. These videos might be a little choppy, so I'm just going to try to show them anyway. This is from a series called Connected Breath, and it really relates to my glass instrument because, again, it's thinking about participants coming together through the act of joining through their breath. So people are blowing hot bubbles together and creating like a very ephemeral, intimate experience where I'm interested in the action more than the end result. And when I make this series, I think a lot about chamber music or like working in a musical band. We have to coordinate our movements and our gestures together based on really subtle moments of, say, like meaningful eye contact and meaningful gestures, so we know exactly the right time to blow and the right time to stop blowing. And I love that, creating that parallel between music and performance art. There is a real aspect of risk in a lot of my performance, and I think that's what makes it really interesting for me. To be able to pull off a stunt like this, I actually have a lot of support team behind the scenes to make sure we can do this kind of thing very safely. But I love that it's a delicate act of tension that relies on trust. And I would only do this with a few certain choice people. This is a deafening trumpet. So it's a trumpet I made there. If I play it, it will blow into my ear. And again, I'm thinking about what's a tool that can both help you and kind of hurt you at the same time. Ability and compromise in an instrument. So I tried this one time when I finished the piece a few months ago, and I was like, let me just see what it sounds like. I'm very curious. At the end of a long night, I played one note out of it, and I gave myself tinnitus in my right ear. So, but that's okay. That's art. It might go away. So, and this is a piece I just made a couple weeks ago. It's an isolating trumpet that wraps around my head. And thinking about, this is kind of a response to the COVID pandemic and kind of like self-containing and isolating while constraining yourself, but also kind of creating a cage or a barrier. And you can see how I had to, I put a plastic bag over it to make it COVID compliant, because that's an issue I'd face with my work. Yeah, but I think I like the aspect of absurdity. And then this is the last slide. This is just a sneak peek of a piece I'm working on right now. And I'm thinking about the opposite of personal protective equipment. So this is personal exposure equipment. So like anti-safety goggles, they're just funnels on all of my facial orifices. And I'm thinking about like kind of amplifying some senses while also making the wearer really vulnerable. And I just can't stop laughing at it when I put it on. So that's the end. That's all I'm going to show of my work for right now. Thank you so much for looking. All right, great. Can everyone hear me okay? It sounds like you can. I'm looking at the chat. Okay. The chronic illness is unknown, to answer that question. I've been trying to find doctors and no one's been able to figure it out yet. So that's fun, but it's a long life-term thing. Okay, great. So thank you all for populating the chat. I'm gonna look at this a little more closely. It's so great to have everyone. Jill's, yeah, representing. So I'm gonna show you, I'm going to demonstrate a flute and also a panpipe out of borosilicate. And I chose these demos because they're quick enough to fit into a live stream, and they're good for beginners if you have never worked with borosilicate before or tubing. But they're also, if you're a little more advanced, you can take these techniques and add coloring, add all sorts of kinds of techniques, cold working, etc. So I think it's good for reaching a range of people. And before I get into it, I have a few instruments here I can show you. So this is a rain stick, and it is a tube sealed inside of another tube with lots of little balls on the inside. And I learned this from Sally Prash. She is a master scientific flame worker and artist, and she was one of my first influences and inspirations on making glass instruments. This is a water hammer, which is water sealed inside of a tube under a vacuum. And when you play it, it creates a metallic noise, almost like there's something metal in there. And that's just the sound of glass hitting the water directly with no air cushion. And this is one of my smaller trumpets. It's an earlier one. And in case you weren't able to hear it before. I'm not going to blow out the speaker, so it's just a quick example. And this is a bell. If you're familiar with scientific flame working techniques, it's a ring seal inside of a blown bell shape with a clapper. And this is another one I learned from Sally Prash. All right, great. So I'm going to get into it. And I'm going to start with the flutes. And I really hope you can see okay. I'm going to try my best to make it visible. So in making the flutes, there are a few ways you can do it. You can measure out your holes according to like different tones that you want to for different tunings. The one I'm going to do, actually, just for ease of simplicity, I use a template, which actually has the whole placement already set. And I punch little pieces of, or I punch little holes in the piece of paper so I can just get a Sharpie and make markings on it. And it saves a lot of time for creating one specific kind of tuning of a flute. So I shared this with the group, and I'll pop a link in because I converted it to millimeters and sizes that I think in the flame shop. I think about millimeters. So if anyone wants to try this out, you're welcome to. All you have to do is print out a piece of standard printer paper. Thanks, Jenna. Yeah, that's the link right there. And then you can try it for yourself if you want. All right, let me grab my calipers. So I'm using 19 millimeter standard wall tubing, but you can really use any size. Between 19 and 25 is great. That's like 3/4 of an inch to an inch. And I'll just show you bird's eye view. So we're gonna wanna do, this is for 15 inches, a 15-inch flute. So I'm just gonna mark with a Sharpie my 15-inch section. And then I'm going to wrap, actually, before I do that, I'm gonna cut it down. So I'm getting my scoring knife and making a little score mark.
We actually had a question, Maddie. Anne asked if you'd ever seen the MIT Glass Orchestra.
I love them. I'm a huge fan. Yeah, and I've met Peter and some of the performers there, so they're really awesome. And we hope to collaborate in the future when the pandemic is over. They're super, super inspiring. It's a great question and very, a really great reference for this conversation. I've never collaborated with them, but I really hope to, and I'd love to. So the way I like to cut tubing down is I just get a ripping hot ball of glass and I put it right on the score mark and it cuts the tubing for me quite easily. So now I've got my 15-inch section and I'm going to just go ahead and wrap the paper. This is so nifty, it just saves so much time. I wrap the paper around it and use my Sharpie to create the little marks where the finger placement's going to be. There we have our Sharpie marks. And then the mouthpiece mark, I have this on the diagram for your reference, but it's going to be about 8 millimeters from the closed end of the tube, and it will be about an 11 millimeter hole. Okay. Turn my torch on. I like to use my blow hose for this. And I'm going to use my nested stopper just to fit it right inside of the tubing. And we're going to close the end of this tube. So I'm just going to heat it and create a round bottom. The size of the tubing, this is 19 millimeter standard wall, but you can make it in any, like really any size. Sometimes I'll make it 30 millimeter, which is like close to 1.5 inches. So it's much thicker than a standard flute, but it actually makes a really nice tone. So I'm creating a round bottom here. I hope you guys can hear me okay over the sound of the torch. And now I'm going to just blow bubbles where all of the little finger marks are. They're in Sharpie, and that's going to be where my fingers are going to go. So This is what I do whenever I want to make a piece that has a lot of holes in it. I'm going to blow out the bubbles first. And I heat it in the flame and do all the blowing outside of the flame. And now I'm going to make the hole for the, or the bubble for the hole for the mouthpiece up at the top. And the reason I blow them out like this is because it just makes it a lot easier to pop the holes, because we already have, a thin membrane where all of the bubbles are. So they're just going to be really easy to pop, and I'll know where all the placement is. So now to pop them, I'm just going to get a thin rod. I like to use 4mm and just rip them open. And on my template, I have listed the different sizes for the different holes. So you can try to make them as close as possible. So the bottom one is 7.9mm. And what I do is I just heat it and gently ream it out. And I like to use my fancy electric calipers to double check and kind of see how close I am and get them to approximately the right size. The second hole is 11.3mm, so it's going to be slightly bigger. I'm going to just ream it out a little bit more. And after I ream it, I want to melt down the sides of the bubbles, because I like to create a nice flat area to put my finger. That way my finger can cover the hole more completely and it's more comfortable. So I'm just going to melt gently down the edge of the lip so it's nice and smooth. And then the three at the top are about 9.5mm. I'm just going to pop them. And I use a cold rod to pop it. I'll heat up the membrane of the bubble really thin and then just jab it into the membrane, kind of go in and out until it pops. And sometimes if you have a sharp enough flame, the pressure of the air, the oxygen will be enough to pop it. And so we have holes in the bottom here. Now I'm just gonna pop the one for the mouthpiece. And this one's gonna be slightly ovular. So I'm reaming it in 2 directions to make it more of an oval shape. So this is the very simple basic flute. And you can see it's very simple technique. We're blowing bubbles and popping holes, but you can experiment with adding color, cold working, sandblasting, all sorts of things. So this is hot, so I'm gonna put it in the kiln. But like my cooking show style, I'll play, I have one that's already cooled down conveniently. I'm not a professional flautist, so if we gave this to a real flute player, it would make it sound way better. So just forgive me on that. So this one is sandblasted. And yeah, it's just really fun. Thank you. These are a couple that I added color to. So this is sandblasted, and I used pastels to create a gradient. And I sealed it in with a fixative. This is just ink. So there's our basic flute. Awesome. Cool. Okay, so good. We have a little more time left. So I'm going to show how to do a panpipe, and any questions that come up. Awesome. Thanks for your comments, guys. I appreciate that. Any questions that come up, just feel free to keep shouting them out. So yeah, so that was 19mm standard wall, but like I said, you can really do any size. And the other thing is, like, you can also just play with popping holes kind of randomly in a flute and see what the noises create, because sometimes you'll just come up with really sort of surprising ways that the sound will be made. So I like to experiment, and it's sort of a really fun thing for me. Update later. I have not, okay, there's a question asking if I have created violin in glass. No, I have not made a violin out of glass. That is a lot more, string instruments are really difficult because they're much more complicated, obviously. I've played a glass violin at the National Liberty Museum. There's an artist who makes them. I don't remember his name off the top of my head, but they create a sound. They're pretty cool, but that's more of a cold working and fuse, I think, like a gluing process. Ocarina, no, I've never made one, but I definitely should. I love Zelda. All right, cool. So keep them coming. So for the panpipe, here's a quick example of one. And this is a really simple thing. I'll just play it real quick. So with the panpipe, I like to just make them out of scrap tubing. I work a lot with hollow boro, and I have a lot of tubing just lying around my studio. So this is a great use for it. Often I'll have tubing that's really short and I won't really have much to do with it, so I can just turn it into a panpipe if I want to. And they're really easy to play. So if you have tubing, I'm working here with like 10 or 14mm standard wall, and I'm going to just create some round bottoms, and I'll show you how I tune them, which is kind of a fun process. So if you want to test the noise that a panpipe is going to make, you just, if it's open, you just put your finger on the bottom, and we can see what kind of sound that makes. I use an electric tuner on my phone, so I can figure out exactly what pitch it is. So that's a B. And I'm going to close the bottom of the tube here. So if you want to change the pitch of the note, you can make it shorter to make it a sharper, higher pitch, or longer to make it lower. So the way I like to tune it is, let's say I want the pitch to be higher, like it's too flat. I'm going to just condense it down and make the tubing a little shorter, and then we can see how the pitch changes. So I'm heating the bottom of the tube and condensing it down and thickening it up. So I don't know if you can tell, but it's a lot higher now. And so that went from a B to a D. So it went up a whole tone. So that's a G. And so I kind of just like to see what tubing I have and cut them to size and then make a pleasing arpeggio from them. And it's important before we assemble to fire polish the tubing. So I'm just going to heat it up in the flame because you're going to want to do that before you attach them together. It's going to be much easier now. So I'm going to let this fire polish. What? All right, so that's hot. Sorry, someone entered the room. All right, so that's hot. So I'm going to let these, I'm going to let that cool down. I have some that I already have ready because this is a cooking show. And this is a D, F, and an A. So kind of like a moody arpeggio chord there. Thanks, Cherry. So what I'm going to do is, the way I like to make these, I don't know if you can see, just going to line them up together and get my Sharpie and just mark two places where I want to attach them. So I'm just going to draw a line there and then one a little bit lower. We're going to attach them in two different points because it'll be much stronger that way. All right, so.
Maddie, we have a question from Katie who asks, one side stays closed?
Yes, yes, one side is closed, the bottom, it's like a test tube, and then the top is open. So, so we're going to attach these together. Now, anytime we want to attach solid to hollow glass, we want to prepare the surface because thick to thin is going to have a lot of stress, as you might know. So I'm going to heat the area with the Sharpie, and I'm going to just add a little dab of solid glass and puff it out. And by puffing it out, it's going to make the connection point there's going to be a lot less stress because the connection where it attaches to the solid glass, it's bulging out slightly, so it's not going to be concave. And when it's concave, there's a lot of stress. So this will mitigate cracking and stress. Then I'll get the second one and I'm going to prepare it in the same area. I'm just using a thin rod of glass and tagging on a little dollop and puffing it out. And then I'll add a little bit more. And then we'll just get a small hot flame and put them together. So now I have that connection point there, and I'm going to add another connection up at the top. And this one is going to be kind of like a bridge coming out, and it's going to be a little more decorative. So I'm adding little bits of glass where they're going to line up. And then I'm going to create a bridge with my 4mm. So this is what it looks like at this point. So it has this connection on the outside. All right, so I'm gonna add one more section onto here. My A note. So just as I did before, I'm gonna add a little bit of glass at the bottom. This will let me make sure that it's a nice hot seal where the solid glass is attached. And we'll attach it together. Right now we have that bridge there, so it's going to be sturdy, and then I'm just going to connect the outside connection to the next two. And I like it because it makes the panpipe more strong and also more decorative. But you can really imagine there's so many ways to attach the panpipes in many different areas. So the possibilities are really limitless. I'm sticking with this one because it's a little more straightforward for a quick demo, but you can attach them at the bottom. You can add decorative elements onto it, little sculptural pieces. So the sky's really the limit. I'm letting gravity bring out the rod connection I just made so we can make it a little smoother. Right, and now it's connected in two places. So, and the pitch might change very slightly when it cools down, because this is still really hot, and I'm obviously being very careful not to burn my mouth or my fingers. But that's our basic panpipe, and we can build up and make a two-octave panpipe or a two-octave instrument of any kind. So so that's basically the idea, though. And with this one right here that I made previously, I have some like loops on either side so you can wear it, and I have the connections down here as well as on the top. And this is kind of heavy wall tubing that I'm working with here. So when you're working with thicker tubing and you're adding it together like this, there's a lot more stress in the glass. So you want to make sure to put it in the kiln, let it anneal for a bit, then take it out and kind of do it in chunks like that. That's the reason I'm able to get away with working with thicker tubing. Since this is standard wall and it's super thin, there's less, stress in the glass. So I'm still going to anneal this, but it's less likely to crack as I'm working on it. And that's one thing I really like about standard wall. So yeah, go to the scrap tube pile tomorrow and try it. It's so fun. If you never try playing glass, definitely it's a fun thing to do, like kind of find out what kind of noises you can get out of them. Cool, well, thanks. That's all I have for right now. So if anyone has any other questions, feel free. Thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate your time and attention.
Thanks, Maddie. Does anyone have any questions regarding the demo or some of the work that she discussed earlier?
Well, if you have any questions, you can reach out to me at MadHotGlass on Instagram. That's a really easy way to reach me.
I'll ask a question since we have like 10 minutes. I'm curious, I think I know a little bit just because I know you personally, but maybe you could talk about how you kind of began to mesh your interest in glass and music.
Yeah, I mean, from the beginning, I always wanted to figure out how to do that. So I discovered that you can blow into, you know, a tube and create a noise pretty early on, just. And when I figured that out, I was like, okay, that's really cool. What can I do with that? So for a while, I just made instruments because I thought they were interesting and fun and delightful. But really within the past year, I began thinking more about glass as like the aspect of music that is most interesting to me, which is this aspect of communication between people. When people are playing music together in a group, there's like it's a very intimate setting and intimate communications involved. So I would say that I started merging my interests with music and glass in earnest really within the last year when I started making the multi-person instruments, as well as the bubble videos where people come together and collaborate with their breath. Because even though there's no sound, I think of it kind of like visual music and the same aspect of collaboration.
Yeah, and I mean, you grew up also like in a family that does like you all play and like sing music together. So I feel like there's probably a real sort of like deep connection to that intimacy or that shared intimacy with collaborating musically, specifically with other individuals. And I think that comes through in the work.
Yeah, absolutely. That's something that's so important to me, is that feeling of like connection with other people. And I have 3 sisters. We always played music together for many years. We were in a quartet. And, you know, when I discovered glass in high school, it took over my passion because I was on track to be a musician. And so glass took over. And I love glass. You know, I got bit by the bug, like people say, but I always really miss that aspect of like playing music together with other people. It's just like the best high, honestly. Like you feel like you're coming together with someone else with a sense of generosity. You're putting something together that you give all of yourself to this this very ephemeral act of creation that is bigger than the sum of its parts. So that's what I really love about music, and finding ways to approach glass and performance and music, like with that idea in mind, with this collaboration and active communal collaboration. That's what I'm really interested in.
I have a question to follow up on that. So thank you for sharing all those photos initially and seeing what those collaborative projects look like, or pieces, I should say. I'm curious if in a dream world, like, and pushing the boundaries, how many people would you want to try and experiment with playing one of these glass pieces? I think 4 people was one of the images that you showed earlier. Have you thought about kind of pushing that boundary at all?
Yeah, I would love to make one that fills a whole room and incorporates like 20 people. And like puts different bodies in different areas. So that's what I'm really interested in my 4-person trumpet, like just placing bodies in space in relation to one another and creating weird relationships within. So if I had a long trumpet that was like 10 feet long and branched out in many different areas. So one person plays the end and everyone kind of gets like a little side section, or someone is playing it, but they're in the other room because it's like one section of the trumpet is like 10 feet long on one side. I would love to push that, and I have to wait, unfortunately, for the pandemic to be over. But I really hope to make something really ridiculous and giant like that someday. How do I think my work is perceived in the deaf and hard of hearing world? That's a really interesting question. And okay, sorry, this was a private question I just got, but how do I think hard of hearing people perceive my work? It's interesting, I had a classmate who was hard of hearing a year ago, because I'm at RIT and there's a large deaf community here. And I think a lot about, like, not only is it sound, but it's vibration as well. So often you can feel vibration if you have your hand on an instrument. You can feel it. You don't really always need to hear it if you're hard of hearing, or if that's a sense that you can't access in the moment. So not just, I don't think sound is really important in my work. And if you heard my trumpets earlier, I'm not focused on making like sound quality that's really beautiful. It's more about the action and the interaction between the people who are playing it. So I think that sound is an important part, but it's not the main issue for me. For me, it's more about like creating a situation with people and individuals inside of it, and something that you can experience visually just by seeing it. And if you can't hear the notes, you can see the struggle on the people's faces as they're blowing into this horn. And like in the one performance, like our blood vessels are about to burst and our faces are turning red because we're fighting each other. And the sound is kind of secondary. So, but yeah, it's an interesting thing to think about.
Great. Yeah, I was just recently reading something, I don't remember, from my own research, but they were talking about the body as material, or like the materiality of the body. And I feel like in what you're doing too, while there's aspects of sound and aspects of studio glass movement and stuff like that, really what is activating these pieces are a body or multiple bodies. And I feel like that becomes a huge component within the work and how it can be presented. And I think that that's a really great question regarding disability, because everyone who is an artist in some capacity, I think we have to begin to think about that more, and how people who aren't able-bodied experience our work.
Absolutely, yeah. I think accessibility is really important. And for me, like, if I go to a place where I can't bring like my wheelchair because I need to use it sometimes, you know, that can be kind of a turnoff for experiencing art. And I think that different people with different access needs, we need to just really consider that. But what you were hitting on, Paige, where it's more about activating the body, like, that's super on point. I think the instruments, they become artwork when they're held and when they're interacted with, and when people can see other people doing that, not as much when they're just lying on the table. So I do think of like art as body activated experiences is quite important for me.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Maddie, for sharing. This was really wonderful.
Thank you so much. This was so fun. Thanks everyone for tuning in. It was really awesome.
Yeah, thank you, Paige. Thank you, Madeline, for being here. I also want to put a plug in for our next GAS student meetup, which is going to be December 8th. And we will have our first international glass artist conversation. And we're actually working with Rochester Institute of Technology MFA students, Renoy Amada and Ying Chun, for a really great program. So the details of that will be available soon. So keep an eye out either in the monthly digest or in our GAS social media.